Thank you very much. What we're going to do for this last part before lunch, and lunch is there, and it is at 1 o'clock, for those of you who don't last long, which I don't. You're not supposed to shout out, "There's my question." But don't worry, I'll pick up on these. Anyway, so thank you very much for putting the questions in. What I'll try and do is take quite a broad range of topics that we want to do, and then very much look for Graham, Olly, Robin, and Erin to then take the questions, and I will try and distribute them fairly and not give anybody what we would call in Scotland the hospital passes. The first one I really wanted to pick up on, because it's very dear to my heart since I've been involved in long-term care for probably longer than I should admit to. But the question I've got is over 50s. You know, what do we do with them? How do they be part of the economy? Because if, you know, there's all the stuff in the press today about state pension age. If everybody's really grumpy about that, I must confess, I did that job. Anyway, that will go to my grave, that one with me. But the point is, there's a massive element of productivity, experience, and skill, and how do we continue to capture that, particularly as this whole economy changes? Graham, would you mind if I kick that one off from you, from the employer perspective? Sorry.
I have a vested interest here.
I didn't like to say, no, you're not. You're young.
I guess. Our challenge, or maybe this is my education, media training coming in, is we've got too many over 50 and over that, and replacing them in certain core skills. And I think that having a planned approach to succession allows you to grab the skills these people have got and pass it to the next generation. I don't think there's an issue. I go to China, and the guy that runs my whole APAC operation is an English guy. He's been in China forever. He's just about to retire, and he's embraced this digital transformation I was speaking to earlier on about direct-to-consumer and using handhelds and the digital, knowing that the resource that it requires to have in the organisation. Now, the person that we brought in is not at that demographic, who's the expert in digital communication to the consumer. But you know, the over 50s aren't cut off from the world. You know, they may not have grown up with handhelds, but they know how to use them now. I don't think it's an issue, personally.
Olly, is there any evidence around this?
Yeah, so I think I've been doing some work with the Westminster government around the National Retraining Scheme, and I think there's a real opportunity here and a kind of a danger. I think that over 50s are going to play an absolutely crucial role, and retraining is going to be absolutely essential. I think we run the risk of some short-termism in government policy, where we, as industries change, we kind of pick up a block of people whose skills or jobs become obsolete, and we train them and slot them back into a job that's then going to become obsolete again in a few years' time. And I think there's a real opportunity to apply the kinds of approaches we've talked about to that group in a very equitable way. So we should be taking the Minerva model, the model we're looking at elsewhere. We're training broad skills and helping those people to have the transferable base in the same way as we are for teenagers taking their first job, in order to enable them to take the best use of the economy as the digital revolution hits, rather than kind of giving them a second best deal and just training them for the next job that's probably going to end, and the next job, and ending up with kind of a very bitty end to their careers.
So can I ask a follow-up, which is, will be a hospital pass for you. Do you think we're actually geared up properly for this debate in Scotland?
I think you're geared up for the debate, definitely. I think in common with everywhere else in the world, there are huge challenges to achieving this. I think it's a cultural thing. Actually, I remember when I was here last year, I was talking to somebody, and we were having a bit of a joke. We were saying the theme was around kind of the robots coming to get us, and we were joking about, you know, you're in this disaster film, and the robots are coming to get us, get our jobs, and they're coming down the corridor, and we're still kind of talking about how we might sort it out. And how do you instill that sense of absolute urgency that we're not going to have time once the robots come for our jobs to then think about the skills? We need to be kind of thinking 5 years ahead. I think we're doing a good job in this room of making that a start. I think actually Scotland is leading the debate on that, certainly within the UK from the research we've done. But absolutely, we need to kind of keep that sense of urgency in the room of making a change now for what's going to happen in the next kind of 5 years, rather than letting things get to the edge of kind of a real challenge before we then kind of make that change. I suspect you might feel that from kind of an employer. The UK way tends to be we wait until employers are screaming about a skills shortage, and then we start developing a course that's going to take 2 years to develop and 2 years to train in order to fill that challenge.
I guess the real concern is we have a people shortage coming at us in Scotland in particular. We've got, certainly in the STEM area, we've got ton of jobs and nobody to fill them with their relevant qualifications. So why is that? Why is that a surprise to us all of a sudden? And I think that's about policy and getting in the front foot. And I know SDS are really into that in a big way and trying to get us thinking forward. You know, the 50s, over 50s are one demographic. I think there's a 30 to 50 bracket that might get lost in the middle somewhere, and that's the people we've got to really worry about. I'll be playing golf.
Erin, sorry, this might be unfair to you. Is this a debate that's come up in Airbnb?
Well, we don't have a lot of over.
That's what I wondered.
When I started 7 years ago, there were only 10 people older than me in the company. It's a little bit more balanced now, but I think the way that we're handling this is we've created a culture of learning where it's expected that you're going to be improving your skills no matter what age or level, and then that kind of gets ahead of becoming obsolete if you're constantly being given a chance to up-level your skills.
Okay, I'm going to move on from that, and Robin, I'll warn you now that you're getting this one first as I introduce the question. And this one actually is one that I've been very concerned about as I've watched how the graduates coming into PwC are different. But the question is, how do we ready or help colleges and unis to open the curriculum to meta skills when there's a perception that they're often wedded to subject specialism? And the follow-on to that, it's not, it's bad enough already, but it gets worse.
Gosh.
What should we stop doing as part of that?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think there is more and more evidence that what universities have been doing has been failing us. And you can look at things, we were talking a little bit earlier, there is a book called Academically Adrift. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I'll tell you the subtitle. It's Minimal Learning on College Campuses. And it measures the progress of students who come in as freshmen and where they get to as seniors. And the answer is they're not getting the skills we've all been talking about all day: critical thinking, creative problem solving, effective communication. And I think, first off, you as employers need to demand more. So I think that's part of what we have to do. I think that will force universities to take another look. So I'm hoping that conversations like this spur the dialogue. We've been very vocal going out and speaking around the world that it may not be our exact habits of mind foundational concepts, but talk to employers, look at what society needs. We have to change our skills. So I think, you know, it will come from society's push. You know, I think you're seeing the cost of higher education. It's no longer accessible to most people. So universities are going to have to respond to that. I think, what do they stop doing? I think we stop worrying about memorizing facts and figures. I think lectures, great way to teach. It's really easy. I prepare my remarks, I get up and talk. This is actually more important, but I'd rather have like continual engagement. Erin and I were just talking. She can't speak for 7 minutes. Our faculty members can't speak for more than 4 minutes. But they have to drive heavy engagement in the topics and lots of thinking. So I think what universities do away with is fact-based, content-based curriculum that is just delivered through lectures. Go watch that online. Spend all the time developing these core skills. And I think you'll end up with a better, more prepared workforce.
Graham, have you got perspective from Edrington?
I'd support Robin 100% there. With my CBI hat on, you hear regularly about businesses complaining about the quality of graduates that are coming in and their work readiness. And my statement to them is, have you gone to speak to the universities and told them what you want? Because they'll keep churning out what they think you want until you actually articulate specifically the skills that you need in place. In my business, we pull our graduates specifically out of the Saltaire Foundation, and they come with a certain set of skills that are suitable to our business. Whether you call them meta skills or social skills or additional and enhanced skills, I don't know, but I took meta skills out in my presentation to just skills. They come with good core skills and then with a certain nuance attached, and we can build on them. And that's our job, to build them and build their skill set in the way that we want them built, and actually they're portable. So, but I think there's a responsibility on business to make sure that the education system and the world, let alone Scotland, understand exactly what we want, and we're not very good at that.
Can I ask a follow-up? Sorry, Robin.
Can I build on
No,
that?
no,
Sorry,
please do.
I hate to do this. But I think, there's some talk about apprenticeships and opportunities, and that's why I would say open the doors to, talk to universities, but also bring students in. Because that's where you start to see what works, what doesn't work, and I think that that is another way to get sort of firsthand experience of what the students are prepared to do. Because my fear is if it's just at the dialogue stage, it becomes very clear, these are the skills we want. It's got to get down to specifics and actually seeing the outcomes of someone who's gone through the curriculum. Sorry, I didn't mean to take away from the moderator.
I just want to share one story really, which was Robin and I were presenting to a UK university that will remain nameless and talking about how to integrate this. And one of the most uncomfortable moments in my business career, Robin asked them the question, so you guys teach problem solving, right? Everyone was like, yeah, we definitely teach problem solving. Where do you teach problem solving? Suddenly, everyone's shoes were very interesting, and nobody really had an answer, because a lot of it, as you were rightly saying, is universities relying on the way things have been done before, and on, as we were saying on our table earlier, the kudos that just having been to university held 30 to 40 years ago, and not thinking intentionally about how they teach the skills that we're looking at. So I think it's not about doing more, and it's not really about kind of changing the components completely. It's about teaching them in a much more intentional way in terms of developing those skills.
So I'm going to ask you the nasty question. You sort of got half the answer in, but you're still getting away from the rest
Excellent.
of it. And I might pick on a couple of the rest of you as well. Do you think our universities and colleges are set up to respond to what you've just said?
Okay, so in infrastructure terms, absolutely. I think the challenge is the one of kind of turning a tanker, and it's about kind of the cultural change. So there's no... I'm under no illusions that this is not a really hard job for senior managers in universities and colleges to do. I think where I've seen it working best, I mean, Minerva is luxurious in one way in that because you set up from scratch, you could hire your staff and you didn't have to do that cultural change. So when we're working with high schools and universities that are changing, I think this is a real challenge. One really brilliant way of doing it, we've seen down in Cardiff University. So they took one single faculty as a start. It was their computer science faculty. And instead of just teaching the computer science degree in the normal way, they built a software academy in partnership with about 300 small businesses in the area. And for each term, those students spend 6 weeks learning through project-based learning a particular topic, let's say cybersecurity, and then they get put out for 4 weeks into a small business to work full-time on cybersecurity and deliver those skills. And the graduates are just way above anything any of those companies have seen, and the vast majority of them, in fact all but 2 that last year, had a job offer by the time they had started their last year because they'd already worked with 5 or 6 companies, they'd already got to know them, and one of them had said, yeah, we're going to take them. So it is absolutely possible. The infrastructure is there, the will is there, I know that. It's just a matter of how to make that cultural change happen, and I think the answer is slowly but surely.
Can I use the chairman's prerogative just to add on that? And as Damien will know, this bit I deeply care about. So actually, when we did the data science graduate apprenticeship, which seems ever so long ago, but was in fact just started October last year, actually we all collaborated together on building the curriculum. And that for me was an absolute revelation. And we were talking about real high-end data science, probably not quite as high as Erin would expect, but for us it was not bad. And the point is, we then worked out how the students would come to us for 4 months in the summers of the 3rd year and the 4th year. And the revelatory bit for me was everybody sitting down and working out how we'd assess those students. Using the PwC professional curriculum, what you might have called the competencies or meta skills, but it required something, and it required a level of open-mindedness and collaboration, which I think might be one of the challenges we pick out of today, is about how we take that to the next level in doing that. So the question I'd like to follow up from that, and Erin, I'll give this one to you first, and it's not as bad as the last one, I don't think, but we'll see. How do we best teach the human skills?
I mean, I think what we've talked about all morning about context and bringing it back to what somebody already knows and giving them a chance to apply the learnings there is the easiest starting point. It's hard to do it in the abstract. Any other?
Robin?
Yeah, I mean, we really believe that curriculum has to be scaffolded. What does that mean? It's not about being presented with something in one siloed context. It has to be done again and again, deliberate practice. So it's about being really clear what you're trying to teach and then giving lots of opportunities to practice it. So whether it's data skills, whether it's how do you get to the heart of a problem? How many times have you been in a meeting and everyone's talking about the symptoms, but it's like, how do you get to the root cause? Okay, that is a skill that can be taught. But you teach people the concept of how to do it, and then you give them lots of opportunity to practice, and then a week later you come back again and again and again. So, thinking about, professional learning for the 50-year-old, for the 20-year-old, it doesn't matter. It's about spaced, deliberate practice, being really intentional about outcomes, formative feedback, and measuring results. And so if we keep that in mind, we can educate anybody at any stage with human skills or any skills.
Okay. Can I go a slightly different way? And this is a great thing about Slido, an absolute cracker of a question that's come in. Graham, I'm going to warn you, you're getting this one first with your two hats. I've been on enough panels to know it's really nice to warn people, and you're going to...
I'm a slow thinker anyway.
So the question, and we've touched on elements of it, Scotland has a very long productivity tail, and I know that from my own work in chairing the National Centre of University and Business. But how do we align investment and innovation with these skills to increase the productivity and, importantly, engaging the SME market, which is the holy grail of Scottish economic debate? Yeah, I told you.
That's a belter, that.
I'm ready to write.
Yeah. If we had the answer to that, we'd have it fixed. You're right. A measure of productivity in Scotland is giving us cause for concern, and it always has done. And that's a mix of, in certain areas, probably relatively low pay, which means it's hard to invest in best available technology to get your productivity up. I don't think MD's non-productive by design. The backbone of Scottish economy is SMEs, and the scale and scope of these businesses is disparate. And I think corralling that is really difficult. So I don't have an answer to say, how do we make everything wonderful overnight? I think it's a process of involvement, using the skill set that we've got, using the government agencies we have, using the private agencies we've got, the collaboration we've got. We've got a challenge in Scottish business in getting senior female managers to board level. So we've now got an initiative which involves collaboration on business and CBI and government to try and break that ceiling. The same principle can be done in productivity. And I've tried it in the food and drink sector, I've tried it in industry sectors. It's a real challenge. One of the things is, let's get a common measure of productivity and understand what it really means. And then we can have the debate.
So Olly, you're not getting away with this one. Your perspective?
So I think engaging small businesses is a challenge, I think, right across the UK and more broadly. I think a couple of things that I've seen working well. I think what we've seen kind of in the dual systems for a long time culturally is kind of much more of a community of business where large businesses in that sector are kind of trying to corral and kind of support smaller businesses. So some of the things we've seen south of the border with things like allowing levy funding to be passed from a large employer to supply chain employers, I think is quite an interesting perspective. I think one of the big challenges is always kind of the lack of capacity in smaller businesses compared to larger businesses. One of the best models, I think, which hasn't really taken off over here yet, is the apprenticeship trainee agency model that's from Australia, and that's looking at using an intermediary organisation to employ apprentices on behalf of a range of small businesses. What does that do? It means that people can take much greater risks. If you're not sure that you're going to be there in a year, you're not going to want to take on an apprentice. But if you've got a company that's doing that on your behalf, then there's a way to kind of minimise those risks, minimise that bureaucracy, allow you to have a stake in education, which I'm sure you would want to do if you had the time and if you could reduce those risks. And I think there are opportunities in things like science parks and elsewhere for that kind of organisation to really help to get apprenticeships to take off for small businesses by reducing bureaucracy and kind of minimising risk.
There are some good reasons why there's been lack of investment and growth in the SME community. And part of it relates back to 2008 banking crisis and liquidity and the risks associated with borrowing at that time. And the SME, most of them are family owned. I've got long memories. And actually, I'm quite comfortable. I don't need to expand. I don't need to improve that. Thanks very much. Because if I do, I put my business and myself at risk. And I think there needs to be a change in that thought process. So we've got legacy associated all that time ago still.
I'm going to hold that one and pick that one up at the end. But Erin, again, to just give you some warning. The point here about SMEs, is there anything that we can learn from global companies such as you about how we build the knowledge and the skills into our SMEs in Scotland?
I mean, I think what Olly mentioned about the university starting with the one program, it's kind of going back to the doing things that don't scale. Find something that works for a small group and learn from that what was successful before you try to tackle the entire problem. That can really, I think it allows you to iterate more quickly and have learnings a lot more quickly than trying to launch something that's going to solve everything in one go.
Robin?
Yeah, I think there is a model that we're seeing globally where there are hubs coming together of small businesses, especially entrepreneurs, whether they're called impact hubs or co-working spaces or whatever it may be. But it's an incredible way for a small business not to be isolated. And I think that would be my message, is there are opportunities opening up, and it is about collaboration. I didn't know about the apprenticeship one in Australia. That's fascinating. But that's exactly what I think small and medium-sized businesses need to do, is realize they're not going to do it on their own. This is a tough world to operate in now in isolation. So that would be my sort of thought. And then it opens up all kinds of opportunities for learning from each other, education, development, collaboration.
David, just a shout from the floor. Scotland's got a unique history in apprenticeships, and particularly in engineering. And a lot of people in the room may or may not know this, but there's a great infrastructure in Scotland called group training schemes, where the large engineering employers get together and they carry the weight of administration and the risk burden. And in many ways, over the last 20 or 30 years, they died away. But in much, as we see in work-based learning, you know, Back to the Future, we're starting to realize the value of them. And I guess also context really matters. A lot of what we get frustrated with is the UK dialogue mapping onto Scotland, and it doesn't really map onto Scotland. So to give you a couple of statistics, gladly we haven't implemented the levy in the way it's happened down south. So there are no, the apprenticeship programme has been in consistent growth and in innovation in Scotland, both at foundation and graduate level, and in terms of overall volumes. We supported about 10,500 apprenticeships back in 2009-10. We're heading up north of 28,000, huge growth. But the real statistic that people are not aware of, it's 12,000 businesses in Scotland that support those apprenticeships. 94% of them are SMEs. They are SMEs. The challenge in Scotland is we have a long tail of micro businesses. So broadly, there's around 300,000 businesses in Scotland. 198,000 are sole traders. Now, a sole trader as being the repository for supporting apprenticeships is a real challenge, because then you think about, well, how would you even begin to knit that together in a way that would make it possible? But the SME market is very vibrant in Scotland and is the backbone of the Scottish system. And it's not the large employers that drive the Scottish system, it's the SMEs, and it's 12,000 at the minute. But nonetheless, I think the group training schemes, which mirror the Australian model, is something that we can grow and develop, because anything that would make it easier for the employer to create those opportunities is really important. But one thing we're not prepared to give on, and this is really, really important, and they've messed with this in England constantly, it's the employed status of the apprentice. You start to mess with that and you lose the value of the apprenticeship. So all of our apprentices have contracts of employment. This is not tokenism. This is not who will, who won't. And part of the problem with the intermediary proposition is, under employment law, who's prepared to take ownership of that contract of employment? And when we've tried to expand the group training scheme out to shared apprenticeships, nobody's jumping forward and saying, tell you what, I'll be the employer of last resort. And that's the trick. And that's where actually you see, even in Norway, but Switzerland, Austria, the wealth of the aggregate employers, typically through the chambers in Germany, they underwrite that in many cases. But there's a lot of lessons to learn. But just to say, on a Scottish level, you know, the SME engagement in apprenticeships is pretty phenomenal. And it has been because we've generally had a tradition of value in apprenticeships. But that value is leveraged from contracts of employment, not somehow variants of that or some, you know, artificial construct, and somehow people are chucked at a later point.
So to support that, I was very happy that we signed, got our employees to sign contracts of employment. It wasn't an issue. They were very happy to do it. What they recognise is there are two elements to it. There's the one through the mechanisms of SDS, but importantly that it's an employment contract with PwC. There are conditions, but people were very happy to take that. I want to do two last quick things. And again, Damien, we could have rehearsed this, but you've given me the intro to it. a number of questions around diversity, inclusion, and then a really big debate going on in Scotland just now about wider participation, which is about giving everybody access on an equal basis to equal opportunity. Just a couple of very quick thoughts. Ollie, is there a UK perspective on that, or anything in particular you would see as different
On the diversity?
and inclusion in Scotland?
So I think this is something that Scotland does better than most of the other areas of the UK. I think one of the reasons that's the case is that you're spending more time thinking about integrating some of these concepts early. So I'm a massive fan of the foundation apprenticeships. In fact, I've been telling the UK government that they should bin T-levels and have those instead, because I think that what I love about them is the kind of way that you can mix your learning between academic and vocational. It gets rid of that whole artificial divide, and it starts to integrate those things early. So for me, this is a truism that I've heard kind of in many, many countries. At primary school level, young people, children we see are inquisitive, excited, doing all the things we want in the future workforce, and then we beat that out of them for 5 years through an exam factory in the middle, and then we come back to trying to give them the skills. And to me, that's the real challenge here: is how do we kind of take that middle section, not do away with the wonderful things we taught children in primary school, and keep them inquisitive and excited and ready to learn for the future.
Erin?
Yeah, I think I talked about how we offer the program to everyone, and that was really important to me. And we've actually seen some interesting things related to who takes the classes in terms of gender. Women are actually enrolling in the classes at a higher rate than men for every single department. They're also completing the classes at a higher rate than men in every single department. It's hard to say. I haven't yet figured out if I think that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I think one of the reasons they might be doing that goes back to kind of the assumption that sometimes women feel like they have to have earned their way into it, and men can say, "Oh, I already know that," and it gets, it can progress their careers. So anyway, I'm looking more into that, but we definitely have seen a lot of job mobility come out of some of the students who have gone through the whole curriculum. Most of those are women, and it has allowed them to move from customer service roles into product managers or data science roles, and so that's really great. And I think that if we only offered our courses to the technical side of the company, that's already biased in terms of the representation of women and underrepresented minorities. And so offering the classes to everyone allows more people to possibly take data science or a more technical path, whereas before they haven't had access.
Graham?
It's quite interesting in our organisation. We've got cultural differences globally, and that brings with it, particularly in the booze game, some challenges. Despite that, Jennifer Wu still runs Taiwan, which was an absolute ceiling breaker. We've got a managing director in Taiwan is female, which is really unusual in that market. When we did the report, we are kind of middle of the pack from a Scottish perspective or British UK perspective, primarily because the senior team are heading towards middle-aged men in the main exec level, and that needs to change. And it's whether we're wrestling with the challenge of whether we force the change or we let it happen naturally. We are convinced as an organisation, a diverse organisation is a better organisation, more economically viable, you get better decision making, but we've got it one level down and it's kind of looking okay, but the top level is still not perfect. And I think we're in the same position as many organisations. Globally, we've got pockets of challenge. US, strangely enough, is 50-50 across the board and mostly under 35. Which is an interesting, because a relatively new business, 5 years old, our business in the States. But elsewhere, we've got some challenges.
So we're just about at lunch, but there's one question I would like to ask each of you, probably either a 1-word or a 5-word answer in doing it. What really came home to me during doing the whole data science apprenticeship with the University of Edinburgh and St Andrews was about giving people confidence and saying we can do this and just blasting our way through it. So my supposition then, unless Olly glowers at me from an evidence viewpoint, is that I think is one of the biggest things. So to each of you, what's the one single thing in a few words we should be doing to give the system confidence that we're on the right path and we can make a real difference through the policy and action? Erin?
I think for us, well, I talked about having a hard time measuring the real results. We do have a lot of examples of success. We have a lot of people who have taken the classes and have really jump-started their careers. They've been able to move into higher paying jobs, and they're more satisfying jobs. And so I think for that, that's the story I'm telling to the senior leaders at Airbnb, is that, you know, we are having an impact in that way, and those things take a lot of time. My first students from 2012, recently, one of them just moved into a data science role this summer. We had someone move into a product manager role about 3 years ago, and so it didn't happen right away. And so, you know, look for those stories and promise that there are more to come.
But the key for me then is you invest in the program, it will have dividends, and it's about employers investing. Robin?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need proof points. So I think it is the obligation of all of us, if we're going to come out and say, here are the things to do, that we have to have evidence. Just real briefly, I mentioned the book Academically Adrift. It uses an objective assessment. We actually give our students that exact same assessment. And our goal was to see, how do we progress on an assessment that measures the things that we say we teach. And we've seen that success. We measure it based on the feedback from employers. So for us, it's not just one thing to put them into apprenticeships, jobs, work study, but to actually get the feedback. So I think that that is what we need to do to keep reinforcing that we're on the right path, is show proof points that this stuff is working, and hopefully get more and more people in the dialogue.
And getting everybody shouting about it consistently.
Exactly.
Olly?
I think for me, it's kind of the inspiring examples. You might think that's weird from the person who's been talking about data all day, but you can talk about data till the cows come home. The thing that people will always remember is the examples and the individuals they've met who've been changed by the system. On the data side, I have copies of all the reports that I've been talking about. So if anyone wants to chat about those or to share any stories, then do pop over.
And I would encourage you to do so. You know, back to, I wasn't joking when I said earlier, it is fantastic to actually have somebody who's got evidence. And that is something that's often sadly lacking, or as might be happening in America, everybody has their own interpretation of evidence. Graham, from both the Edrington viewpoint and the CBI, on confidence.
2 words: collaborate and engage.
Okay.
I guess.
And I couldn't have asked for better words, because those are ones. So first of all, to the audience, can I thank you very much for your diligence this morning, and most certainly my thanks for then raising the questions, but actually much more importantly, may you join me in thanking the 4 panellists.